Dan, thank you.
All right, let's bring in Stephen A. Smith to get a little more perspective on a couple of NFL stories. And Stephen A., I do want to start with Marshawn Lynch sitting down prior to the preseason game last night against the Cardinals. What's your take on him doing this, especially in the wake of what's been happening with Colin Kaepernick?
Well, it's not the first time, Michael, that he has sat down for the national anthem. I'm sure there were times in his career when he has stood, but there have been numerous occasions when he hasn't. And so he told Jack Del Rio beforehand that it's something that he's been doing primarily for the last 11 years. It's not a good look to be sitting down for the national anthem, period, let alone sitting on a cooler and eating a banana while doing so. But nevertheless, his position is consistent. If you recall, back last September, he was a guest on the Conan O'Brien show, albeit a retired NFL player at the time. Here's what he said. I would rather Colin Kaepernick kneel for the national anthem than stand up, put his hands up, and still get murdered. This is what he said. And so clearly his position was in support of Colin Kaepernick and the position that he had taken. When you consider that along with Marshawn Lynch's, affinity for the impoverished and disenfranchised community throughout this nation, particularly in Oakland, California, where he is from, this dude is clearly somebody that considers himself from the ghetto, from the gutter itself, and is constantly trying to reach back and send a message to lift those up and also to acknowledge the fact that there's some serious problems that need to be addressed. We may not like what he has done, no question about it, but here's the bigger question, Michael Eaves. Why is it that no one has really said anything when Marshawn Lynch did it in the past? But there was such an uproar when Colin Kaepernick did it. Colin Kaepernick spoke to the media. Marshawn Lynch never did. So people just let it go and just said that's beast mode being beast mode. But essentially, either he got a pass or Colin Kaepernick was taken to the woodshed unnecessarily. And that's really what the issue is as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Do you think it's more on the media, of which you and I are members of, but we were not involved in all these particular questions to Colin Kaepernick, or is it more on society and just they pick and choose who they want to have as a target, so to speak?
Combination of both. Certainly the media, because you needed to bring rapt attention to Marshawn Lynch's previous positions in terms of not standing for the national anthem. And just because he doesn't talk to the media per se didn't mean that there should have been a dereliction of duty on the part of the Fourth Estate to really bring attention to the position that he took so we could speak on this long before Colin Kaepernick ever took his position. But it's also a societal issue because clearly it's something that has happened before. Clearly it was something that was noticed before by Beast Mode, and society at large just shoved it aside. With Colin Kaepernick, was it just him kneeling for the national anthem, or was it the fact that he stood up during an election year, during a presidential campaign, and announced to the world exactly why he was taking the position that he took? And maybe the belief was he could potentially affect votes, which is why people went in an uproar. These are all ifs and maybes. We don't know definitively why it seemed to be one way for one athlete and another way for another athlete, but clearly those questions are valid and legitimate at this particular moment in time.
Let me ask you about another running back who did not see the field last night, and that was Ezekiel Elliott. Of course, he's planning to appeal a 6-game suspension from the NFL, hoping to get it reduced, but nonetheless, all likelihood, Stephen A., he's going to miss some games here at the beginning of the season. But Jason Garrett did not play Ezekiel Elliott last night. What is your take on him sitting out?
Well, I mean, he's suspended. Even though he does not suspended for the preseason games, the bottom line is that if you're not going to be playing for the first 4 to 6 games of the year, because we all know he's going to appeal it and try to get the suspension lowered, then if you're Jason Garrett, you got to get other people active and ready to go because you got plenty of time to work with Ezekiel Elliott. I do think it's important, however, to point out that while we may not be in a position to have a problem with the 6-game suspension, I think it's important to point this out. I don't like how the NFL handled this matter in terms of dragging their feet towards making a decision. When I think about their decision about Big Ben Roethlisberger, the 6 games ultimately reduced to 4 after he was accused of sexual assault, they seem to be sending the message, hey, we don't like, that you put yourself in this situation, but we don't know what happened. OK, in the case of Ezekiel Elliott, they seem to be hell bent on attaching a level of guilt to him, which makes the NFL judge and jury and executioner. And I'm not sure I like any sports league playing that kind of role where they're defining and determining his guilt as opposed to local law enforcement officials. That's the difference I see between Ezekiel Elliott and Big Ben Roethlisberger. And then we didn't even bring up Josh Brown, the kicker for the New York Giants, whose wife accused him of hitting her at least 20 different times or physically abusing her at least 20 different times, and he got a 1-game suspension. These are the kind of things we haven't brought up. So it's very, very alarming to me that the NFL handled this matter the way that they did. Not the amount of suspension, it's the time that it took, and them seeming hell-bent on attaching guilt to Ezekiel Elliott as if they know something law enforcement and everybody else didn't know.
And that was also the criticism from the Cowboys prior to the announcement of that 6-game suspension. Stephen A., always keeping it real. Thanks for hanging out with us here on Sports.